Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating and honestly highly polarizing media segment from Sky News Australia. It sits right at this explosive intersection of wealth, politics, and modern economics. Now, just to be clear up front, our goal today isn't to take a side. We are simply going to systematically unpack exactly how this media outlet frames the debate. So let's jump right in. $1 trillion. Just take a second to wrap your head around the sheer scale of that number. The source segment kicks off with the monumental announcement that, following the public listing of his company SpaceX on the New York Stock Exchange, Elon Musk officially became the world's first trillionaire. It's a milestone with so many zeros it almost feels abstract, right? But this financial event acted as an absolute lightning rod. It instantly sparked a massive ideological clash across the entire political spectrum. To make sense of it all, we're going to break this debate down into 5 parts. First, the trillion-dollar milestone. Second, the political backlash. Third, creating wealth in millionaires. Fourth, taxation and public value. And fifth, the socialist critique. Starting with Section 1, the trillion-dollar milestone, and how the broadcaster frames the achievement. Right out of the gate, the segment actively builds a defense for Musk's new wealth by focusing on his actual, tangible output. They argue that in our modern moral economy, critics tend to act like achievement is only acceptable if it doesn't actually produce anything concrete. So to counter that, the broadcast rattles off the massive physical infrastructure Musk built to reach that trillion-dollar mark. We're talking about taking SpaceX public, revolutionizing global transport and cars, digging underground tunnels, developing widespread software, and, perhaps most dramatically, building rockets that go to the dark side of the moon and back. The core promise they're pushing here is that extreme wealth is completely justified by massive technological output. Moving to Section 2, the political backlash and the left-wing response. Now, despite that long list of technological achievements, the political pushback was immediate, and it was severe. The segment highlights a starkly different perspective by quoting Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders. Sanders tweeted that Musk's rise to trillionaire status is not a time to celebrate, and he goes much further than that, actually arguing that one individual holding this much money is actively destroying the social fabric of our democracy. The broadcaster uses this to emphasize just how deep the ideological divide really is. Where one side sees this incredible technological triumph, the other literally sees an existential threat to society itself. And that sentiment was definitely echoed by others. They point to New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani, who responded to the SpaceX listing by tweeting, "Reason 1 trillion why we should tax the rich." Notice how the broadcaster isolates these specific political reactions. They do this to highlight the immediate, almost predictable demand for wealth redistribution and aggressive taxation that follows this kind of immense capital accumulation. The friction even gets a bit personal. The broadcaster reports on a Democratic commentator who publicly called Musk one of the most unintelligent billionaires they had ever witnessed. In response, the host fires back with a highly sarcastic counterargument. They joke that, wow, Musk must be so unintelligent that he just accidentally built self-landing rockets, accidentally reshaped global transport, and somehow failed upward into becoming a trillionaire. Notice the rhetorical strategy here. The broadcaster is using extreme sarcasm to frame the critics' dismissals as being completely disconnected from physical reality. Which brings us to Section 3, creating wealth and millionaires, and the pro-capitalism counterargument. 4,400. The segment claims that when SpaceX hit the stock exchange, it didn't just make Elon Musk a trillionaire, it instantly created 4,400 employee millionaires. And they are very careful to specify that we aren't just talking about high-level executives in suits. We are talking about everyday workers, from cafeteria staff to welders, who are compensated in stock options over the years rather than just a higher base salary. And this brilliantly illustrates the macro data through a micro narrative. The segment introduces us to Juan Hernandez. Juan started working at SpaceX as a welder, making $28 an hour. But through payroll deductions over 10 years, he bought shares in the company. So when the IPO hit, Juan stood to make roughly $880,000 right at the opening bell. The broadcast uses Juan's story as the ultimate embodiment of the American dream, an immigrant who worked hard and achieved literally life-changing wealth directly because of the corporate structure Musk created. Armed with that story, the broadcaster goes on the offensive, drawing a really aggressive comparison. On one side, you have Elon Musk, who the segment argues creates infrastructure and enables space exploration, resulting in 4,400 instant millionaires. On the other side, they position Bernie Sanders, arguing he creates socialist policies to take money from people who earn it while having only ever created one millionaire himself. The media strategy here is to accuse critics of possessing a remarkable lack of interest in how wealth is actually generated, assuming it just exists to be redistributed.
All right, Section 4, Taxation and Public Value, and the question of who delivers more.
To counter the narrative that billionaires are dodging their civic duties, the source points to a matter of public record. In the year 2021 alone, Elon Musk paid $11 billion in taxes. $11 billion. The broadcaster throws out this staggering figure to entirely dismiss the idea that the government somehow needs to start taxing him more, advancing the argument that aggressive taxation is just going to drive wealth creation away. The segment then explicitly juxtaposes Musk's financial footprint against the performance of publicly funded officials. They compare Musk, who, again, they highlight pays billions in taxes and builds companies that deliver value to millions, directly against New York Mayor Zoran Mandani. They point out that Mandani takes a wage funded by taxpayers, yet fails to deliver public value, pointing to unsafe New York subways and street conditions. It's a sharp contrast intended to make you question who actually provides more value to society, the private entrepreneur or the public servant. The segment also highlights a pretty rich layer of irony regarding that whole threat to democracy claim. The broadcaster points out that Musk paid $44 billion to purchase Twitter, creating the exact digital town square that politicians like the mayor of New York used to post their attacks against him. The host dryly notes that if Musk is truly trying to destroy democracy, funding the exact platform his opponents use to voice their dissent is a highly unusual strategy. Finally, Section 5, the socialist critique, focusing on wealth inequality and hyperinflation. The broadcaster brings up Senator Elizabeth Warren, who provided a vivid framing of the wealth gap following the trillion-dollar news. She tweeted that the typical American household would have to work more than 11 million years to make Elon Musk's level of wealth. 11 million years, it is a powerful, easily digestible statistic perfectly designed by Warren to highlight the mind-boggling disparity between the working class and the ultra-rich. However, the broadcaster immediately turns this timeline logic right back around to accuse Senator Warren of hypocrisy. They report that Elizabeth Warren's own net worth is estimated at about $10 million. Using her exact same framing, the source points out that it would take the average American 96 years of work to match her wealth. Furthermore, they assert that the new taxes for the uber-rich proposed by Democrats wouldn't even apply to her bracket. And the segment ends on a deeply sarcastic historical note. They joke that, technically, Elon Musk isn't even the first trillionaire in human history. They point out that back in 2009, thanks to the left-wing policies of Robert Mugabe's government, the average Zimbabwean actually became a trillionaire. Due to catastrophic hyperinflation, the government had to issue $1 trillion notes just so people could afford 2 cups of coffee or a bus fare. It's the broadcaster's final punchline, a warning that trying to forcefully engineer economic equality often just destroys the value of the money itself. And that brings us to the core tension of this entire explainer. We've seen the broadcaster's vigorous defense of capital creation, and we've seen the harsh political backlash it inspires. So I leave you with this to think about. When extreme wealth creates world-changing infrastructure and lifts thousands of employees into millionaire status, yet simultaneously sparks immense political friction and fears of democratic decay, how should modern society measure its true value? Look past the outrage, pay attention to the specific framing tactics we unpacked today, and decide for yourself. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.